Thank you, Mr. Delzin. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. I know that you've just had something to eat, so you are not as energetic as you should be, but my call deserved a little warmer response. Now, I'm going to be digitally different. I'm going to read. And it's deliberate. My response is impressionistic. It is not a researched response in its entirety, so you will forgive me if I give you my impressions of the Fringe school and some of the features that impinge on the role of the principal. First of all, I have to share some of my understandings that overlapped with previous speakers on the Fringe school. For me, the idea of Fringe schools connotes a plethora of negative associations. Low self-esteem, anti-academia, instant gratification, violence, and perhaps more grimly, dissipation of energy and death. The existence of such schools on our urban doorstep should unsettle us, make us uncomfortable. For Fringe schools testify loudly to the prevalence of grievous injustice to victims of circumstance beyond their control, largely. In the words of the Education for All, marginalization in education is a form of acute and persistent disadvantage rooted in underlying social inequalities. It represents a stark example of clearly remediable injustice. Fringe schools are a mark against our collective conscience. They cry out for immediate attention, for mandatory transformation as a basis for ending them. They draw attention to social, moral, academic disadvantages and deficits, if you like that term. The social expectation is that an alert and socially conscious Ministry of Education will trigger urgent mechanisms for corrective action in order to alter the human slide. I know that his reference was made to the idea that we should not invest so much in the expectation of the Ministry of Education, but the Ministry of Education is empowered by the state to bring about education for all so that we can have sustainable, healthy, sustainable development. It can't shirk that responsibility. The alertness of such a response should be rooted in an understanding that ultimately marginalization violates the dignity of the human being, of all citizens. Furthermore, it deprives the society of the full value of the self-actualized potential of all its citizens. It makes us all poorer. All stakeholders, therefore, should rouse themselves into action and not just eradicate the scourge, but equally importantly, to make sure that the dynamic community conditions that give rise to fringes are purged from our spaces. As the 18th century British poet so poignantly and touchingly put it, full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air. That poet had passed by a churchyard, a country churchyard, and in his imaginings, he could see that there were hundreds of people who had died and their remains were there, but they had not seen the light of their creative day. Indeed, some of us can testify to hundreds whose fates were tragically sealed not much beyond the adolescent stage, thus rendering the poet's vision almost poetic. I used to be the principal of a school, one of the Fringes, Malik Secondary Comprehensive. I've been away from there for a while, but there's still a teacher who would call me every time another one hits the dust. And it has been frequent. It has been frequent, not beyond 25 for most of the time. As the representative of the state, and for a matter of such urgency, because I'm deeming Fringe schools a matter of urgency, a crisis, the Ministry of Education must be guided by a common policy framework for Fringe schools. It seems to me that it is willy-nilly. There's no accountability. Year after year, school is not performing. Nobody's passing. Windows are broken up. Vandalism is taking place. That we fix, we patch, and so on. No, I don't see any accountability. How do we move the school from year to year? What has happened there in terms of social consciousness, development of young people, and so on? What has been in the rise and what has been declining? So I'm saying that these schools cannot be allowed to flounder, wither, and die. For ultimately, if their life circumstances do not change, schooling may very well exacerbate an already bad situation. Indeed, one of the statements I read indicates that where you already have disparities at the starting point, then, and the school system does not, or the conditions for clearing up the disparities don't exist, then the results are going to make for more and more alienation, and the elite class will be further and further away from the rest. And the effects of the fringe will spread. So Dr. Bernard was identifying the contours of the fringe. And you notice that it's an ever expanding and expanding and expanding, so it's going now from Patna village up into Toku. So the ministry these fringes must be treated as special cases that warrant consideration in accordance with their specific needs. Such schools will come to realize from the sincerity of support that they receive to their condition that they matter as any other school in any other part of the country. Equality of treatment before the law is what our Constitution has prescribed as a basis for respect and social action. Such a framework will consider some of the following. Staffing. If a school has been defined as a fringe school, which means that it has certain kinds of issues that it has to grapple with, then whoever is placing people there must have a sense of who I'm sending, who is going there. It starts with the principal. Whom am I assigning there to lead this thing? To lead it to what? So, is the staffing adequate? Are the qualifications adequate? What qualifies somebody to work in a situation like that? I'll describe in a minute. What kind of training? And what about dispositional qualities? And other things like their emotional sense, their sense of wholeness. If you know somebody is emotionally brittle, Are you going to send them into a situation where there's already brittleness? Well, brittleness on brittleness give us what? Incentives. Incentives. Is there a need? The ministry will look at that as part of its framework. Allusion was made to the fact that I spent a year in a Commonwealth situation in London. And in those schools at the time, I don't know if it still exists, when once they decide that a school has certain kinds of troubling issues and it needs a certain kind of commitment and output from the teachers, incentives are provided. You can't say that something is problematical and treat it as if it is normal, including the incentives that you provide for people who you want to grapple with it. Suitably, and I listed this one, a suitably maintained playing field. I know a large numbers of schools in the fringes have no playing fields. We have no male teachers, or increasingly less and less male teachers. They have no playing fields. Where do the children play? Where can they play? And at the same time, we're talking VAPA, and we're talking a whole set of other things. And the basic provision is missing. Appropriate quantum of school security as an ongoing thing. And I said it must be networked into a police neighborhood system. The horse has already bolted, so we can't bury your head in the sand and think that it's business as usual. Adequate and ongoing psychological arrangements for guidance and support. We've all identified that. A strategic intervention schedule to treat with identified needs. Sometimes needs are identified, and they take so long. The student has left school, or the teacher is off the scene, or the class has... The gap between identification and treatment or response, adequate response, is too large. And I'm saying not every teacher is suited to the vagaries of every situation. Now, I just identified those as some must-puts in the framework, because I'm realizing that we're having more and more schools in the fringe category, and we don't seem to be addressing them as special cases. And I remembered an expression that is identified with Dudley Sayers, a former economist, which is that you treat each situation as different with its own set of issues. So he calls it the limitation of the special case. And I'm saying that the fringes must be regarded in that way, if we are to address their needs. A typical observed fringe is a place where negative exogenous forces are in such dynamic interplay as to render teaching and learning challenging, if not at times impossible altogether. Cumulatively, it can destroy all aspects of school culture, whether it is the aspect of safety, whether it is teaching and supports for teaching, whether it is the school-home connectivity, or whether it is the institution. When once certain fringe behaviors manifest and are interplaying with each other, they make nonsense of school culture as we know it. And those of you who are familiar with some schools in the larger fringe, the fringe extension in the East-West Corridor, you'll know what I mean. Its features can consist of combinations of the following disturbing tendencies: high absenteeism of students, and teacher. Student indifference to homework, significantly reduced teaching periods due to recurring disruptions. So a class may be timetabled for 35 minutes, and by the time you take out the disruptions and teacher attention to disruptions, you are dealing with 15 minutes. And if that goes on, you just have to work that out and work that out and see what a student gets from a typical session like that. We have not yet considered how the teacher taught, if anything was taught at all, what objectives were achieved, and so on. Verbal and physical abuse, aimlessness and restlessness, purposelessness, stealing, negligible observance of school rules, vandalism of school property, blatant disrespect for colleagues and figures of authority, and instant gratification. Added to the foregoing is that a fringe school is an institution that is often stereotyped negatively by their own teachers, parents, and surrounding community. It is a formidable array of negatives that can easily overwhelm the most heroic of efforts. It is not difficult to see then how deficit thinking can result from this apparent chicken and egg situation, and how the downward spiral of C results can be accounted for. I have to say, however, that all is not lost. My recent discussions with school leaders, some school leaders, and my own direct experience in such schools in the fringes remind me that despite the overwhelming odds, some students have flourished in academia, in sports, in the arts, and whatever else schools become engaged in. The problem, however, is that greater transformation effort is needed, because we are having this discussion because we suspect from the results there and other things that the vast majority of our students are not achieving, and in terms of valuing, are not on the right track. So in general terms, how have teachers been operating? Have they been up to the task in the French schools? And I thought I'd just draw your attention to some responses by teachers. The following bullet points represent just a snapshot from a teacher's perspective. And I want to add this: they are not meant to detract from high quality sacrifice that some teachers make in just staying the course and contributing to the welfare of students. So the first one is, though teachers have received professional training and periodically attend strategic updates, some of the emerging psychological problems often find them wanton. In other words, they don't feel that they are equipped to deal with some of the problems that have been identified by previous speakers. They don't think they are trained to handle certain kinds of issues. Their energies are so sapped in the face of certain unrelenting negative behaviors from students and their relations that they often contemplate giving up. So if you have a teacher in the fringe who has begun to contemplate giving up, it means that nothing is happening. Because the contemplation of giving up postpones planning, postpones displaying enthusiasm for work, etc., etc. Postpone the idea of, well, you can't motivate students if you are thinking of leaving. If you are thinking of leaving, you can't tell the student to be happy to stay. They feel underpowered to deal with unrelenting negative behaviors from the students and their relations. Some of them, some burnout veterans, are simply waiting to go home. Faced with an official school feeding that is inadequate, they sometimes exhaust their own financial resources in catering to the nutritional needs, deficiencies of the students. We reminded some students come to school on a diet of soft drink, irritable, fretful, and unable to concentrate for long periods. Sometimes some teachers resort to a futile focus on the syllabus only, ignoring the increasing demands of the whole child. Institutional time can be consumed by attempts at solving social problems, particularly those involving rival gangs or families or other community aggregations. Rarely can the teachers depend absolutely on the student support service because the quantum of staffing and treatment and schedules, options and resources are woefully inadequate. A ratio of 1 support officer to 500 or 1,000 students is not in the least encouraging. In some cases, teachers have lost a belief in the teachability of their students. In the face of the seemingly intractable difficulties, they mark time on the job. Some simply take heart in the assurance that their money is running, regardless of what else or is not happening. Teachers stiffen into sarcastic aloofness and behave as if the students are invisible and unfeeling. In short, all of them, teacher and student alike, seem victims together. Now, it is clear, I want you to remember that I started off by saying that this is not to detract from the high quality of work which some teachers do. But because of the way we were speaking, or what I was hearing, I needed to just register that the Fringe schools are not easy zones. And you have teachers who are very well equipped, who start off with very good intentions and do a lot of things and so on, and then they suddenly realize that there's an unrelenting feature that is coming into the school that they don't feel equipped to deal with. And then, so that reduces effectiveness, and we get into stalemates. And I'm just hoping that enough people become sensitized to this so they become a little alert, or more alert, and look again. So it is clear from the above that we have to pay greater attention to how conditions of service can adversely affect one's professionalism, one's general sense of well-being. The conditions themselves constitute a formidable constraint. But we have to continue to strategize to surmount them as we teach and learn to teach. Now, the burden of my response, having said all of that, is that the principal, the role and person of the principal are the most pivotal elements in whatever transformation is to take place. I'm saying that I know that several factors are listed, but those factors, all of them revolve around the role in the school setting of the principal, who that person is. So in terms of school personnel, the role of the principal is key to the transformation of such schools. It befalls him or her through vision, professionalism, wisdom, sense of the needs of the children, and staff empowerment, strategic use of scarce resources to try to reinvent the school as a productive place of learning. It is for the principal to lead the charge in centering the transformed school around the identified needs of the students. However, at best, transformation is a gradual process subject to ebbs and flows, so patience and forbearance are necessary for the long journey. Now, some of the schools, our system of assignment of principalship, unfortunately, doesn't allow some good things to happen. If a principal is assigned and he usually has a year to go, he's 59, it's difficult to transform a school in a year. I like to say that a school is like a big ship. A big ship. It moves slowly in response to your turning of the wheel. If you're accustomed to driving a car and you do this, the car will move almost automatically. With a big ship, after you've done that, it takes a while before it begins to move. The other thing about it, so it moves slowly. So when a principal comes in, principal has to spend some time understanding the school, understanding its issues, know the relationships there, have a sense of who the parents are, the connection with them, who are the other stakeholders. That is time. The principal must know these things before the principal can begin to turn the thing. By that time, the principal has gone. In any case, somebody who is the average 59er placed in a Fringe school thinks that is punishment. They want to kill me. So he, he adopts a laid-back attitude. So I'm saying that the transformation is a gradual process. And when we are selecting a principal in mind, we will think for a Fringe school. We will think that the person needs time to understand the environment before they can make significant inputs into changing it. And this process is often a dispiriting experience because the high, giddy spirit of one day's apparent achievement does not necessarily translate or spill over into the following day. And in such context, the next day, you may have to renegotiate again. So, having said all of that, what are some of the things that I believe principal can do? Particularly recognizing the challenges which teachers face in this situation. The principal has to be physically and emotionally strong to empathize with and represent the teachers and build a mutually enriching, empowering relationship with them. Principal has to work in relationship with the teachers, with the parents, and so on. But this one I just highlight. And this is a quote from Burns, one of the architects of the transformational leader doctrine. The principal has to be emotionally strong emotionally, physically strong to exercise and to be in a position to empathize. If you don't empathize with the people you lead, then you're not going to get anything done. That's a critical basis for establishing synergy. The principal has to strive to change the beliefs of teachers, beliefs that may be anathema to students' learning. In fact, one educator says that that's one of the critical functions of the principal in a fringe institution. Principal understands what the school has to achieve, a sense of what the school can achieve, a sense of the purpose of the school, and has to be very, very open to any belief or values articulated by teachers which are running counter. So the principal has to maintain the integrity of the purpose position of the institution. This third bullet is also a quote. It says, "It becomes the responsibility of the school principal to address and eliminate the costs of deficit thinking by forging strategies to help teachers to move beyond notions of marginalization and towards equitable education." Why? Because the enemy of the school, and more so for the fringe school, is the thinking that the students can't learn. They can't behave. They wouldn't amount to anything. And I'm saying in the looking glass self, it does happen that if you think they're not going to learn, they can't learn anything because they come from that place or that place or that place, that is not going to happen. They're not going to learn. You're going to set up the arrangements for them to fail. Recognizing the negative forces that can erode the moral basis of the school, the principal must be a strong and consistent advocate for the school's core values. I think I said that before. So he cannot be lukewarm. He must walk the talk. Now, we talked about making bridges with the community and meeting the parents and so on. And sometimes there's a tug of war there, a dilemma which schools face. One of the rules of all schools in this country is if two students having a problem and they cannot deal with it amicably, they must refer the matter to the teacher or to some figure of authority in the institution. And it has been my experience that I've had to deal with certain individuals very harshly for violating that rule. They take the law into their hands and beat up somebody and so on. And then I call for the parent. And in the male in particular, the father will say to me, "Sir, you crazy or what? I tell my child, don't take nothing from anybody." He has to be able to defend himself. Because if he doesn't defend himself, he cannot come back home, or he can't walk the street of our community. He has to be known for competent at defending himself. So there's a situation where what we are saying to the student and what the parent is expecting are seemingly in collision. So question, what do we do? Well, I say we continue to do what we have to do. Hopefully, some parents will get the message and understand that violence begets violence, and there's a high prevalence of violence in those communities when people attempt to rank, that's the word they use, to rank in that way. The principal must symbolize the possible forward movement of the school in acts, in everything that he or she does. A creative principal must lead direct staff and students in making optimum use of projects that have the potential to mobilize the community of the school that way lies school community connectedness. At least that is one of the ways. Principal must encourage the celebration of increments of achievement. Some people argue that the children are not doing anything, they're not doing anything, and so on, and the children achieve things. Little things. Sometimes they're little in our estimation, but because you understand it, as a principal, you arrange, or you delegate, or you ensure that the situation is created for the students' achievements to be made visible. If their negatives are being made visible, why don't we make their positives visible and encourage them and so on? You'll be amazed of how those young men who are 17 years old, who are playing, if you notice, they're playing football. They may be the bad boys in the school, quote unquote. But the one thing they want is for you to put them in the assembly, in the hall, put them on the stage to get to receive the adulation of their peers. They want that. It's the one time as well that you'll see them huddle to pray or to give the impression they're praying. There's suddenly some religious humility descends on them and they call in on the Lord to help them to win the match and so on. But the major point I'm making is that they need to feel good. And if the school can identify constructive ways of doing that, not going overboard and so on, that is fine. And the principals, effective principals, conduct celebrations of the efforts of not just their students, but their staff, but critically for our Fringe school students. The principal must work towards the development of wholesome social and professional relationships among staff as solidarity in the face of the disturbing elements we've discussed. You know it's important to have solidarity in a school. Some of the schools have been very large, and the principal could be very lonely in a large school. So the principal, and take on the school by himself or herself. So it's important to have solidarity. But that solidarity will start with shared purpose. Shared purpose. A sense of shared destiny. The principal must facilitate the involvement of, parents in the school's endeavors. And at the same time be a leader in rationalizing homeschool moral dilemmas, as I've identified just now with respect to fighting. And I want to underline that the principal has to insist that teachers recognizing the whole child and the issues of Fringe, insist that teachers adopt methodologies that will make sense to the children. And constructivism was identified before, and I have it underlined here as one. Ways in which diversity could be appreciated, respected. And then there are other things like the physical health of staff, trips, arranging for trips together, for meditations together, retreats together, and so on. I'm emphasizing the principal-teacher relationship in this. The principal must also work for close collaboration with the representative union. And in this, we are talking about getting their buy-in. It's a French school, so it has special issues, and the school may have to do some things out of the contract box. the school may have to do some things outside of the contract box. Some things that were not envisaged when the contracts were done. But society does not remain static. So contracts really need to be reviewed to deal with changing circumstances. It was said that I was in one of those schools in London, and one of the things I observed there is that at every single material time the students are supervised. Whether it's lunchtime, arrangements are made for staff to supervise the children, because the children who are in the school day at lunchtime are the responsibility of the school. We have a situation where you can be, I was the principal of Malik. At the time there were 1,600 children. And lunchtime, teachers are free by legal arrangement, contractual arrangement, to go away and come back to start the afternoon session. So if you are in a fringe school which is given to a lot of antisocial behavior, you can have 10 fights in a break time, 10. And when there's a fight in one of these schools, it becomes bedlam, because everybody wants to see or get in the action. Now, I've always thought that it could not be. There were teachers who stayed back and helped, but they did it out of their sense of duty. It is not the arrangement that we are all in this as a community together to see about these 1,600. It's not the contract. There are other things. So going out of the box, out of the contract box, in addressing the needs and the issues of the student. We used to walk through the community of Mova to get a sense of where the children are coming from. But you know, there are some issues with that. You can't force anybody to walk there. You can't, if a teacher says she's not working or he's not working, then that's it. And if you're going up there and somebody throws a boulder and hits somebody on the head, because a boy remembers that teacher in front there had done something to me, that may be the end of it. People will say, okay, it's now dangerous. But we're in a dangerous situation. But the point I'm making is that the buy-in from the union has to be sought in order to deal with the real issues of our country. And finally, for me, all of the above underline certain critical steps that the leader will take to address the perceived needs of students. And they are the things we know: developing the vision with staff to address those needs, selling the vision with passion, with energy and enthusiasm, but with openness and flexibility, navigating the way forward with clarity to help through the cobwebs, and leading the charge up front with unswerving commitment, sustained motivation, beliefs in others, student-centered, people-centered. Thank you. I just want to end and recommend this verse from John's Gospel. Those of you who are familiar with John's Gospel will know that at the end, when Jesus returned, there was a discussion between Peter and John. And Jesus had some parting words for Peter. Jesus says, "In all truth I tell you, when you were young, you put on your own belt and walked where you liked. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and somebody else will put a belt around you and take you where you would rather not go." End of quote. That is really how the principal role will manifest in sacrifice of self. Thank you.